Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at a paper all about a new architecture for large language models. It's called the Inner Thinking Transformer, or ITT for short. Now, I know you guys like to get right to the heart of complex topics, and this one definitely has some really interesting ideas. So let's get right to it and see how this ITT is trying to get AI to think smarter, not harder.
Well, what's interesting about this research is that it kind of addresses the problem of LLMs being kind of resource intensive. We see a lot of cool things coming from LLMs, but the larger they get, the more resources they need. And, that's not really sustainable for everyone. And this ITT is kind of aiming at addressing that problem.
Right, and the paper definitely does get into some of the technical details behind that, but maybe we could start with the big picture first. Like, what if these LLMs could learn how to focus their brain power, like allocate more resources to the parts of a problem that actually need it?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's what the ITT is designed to do. It's sort of like if you could teach a model to be more strategic in its thinking process, right? So instead of treating every single piece of information with the same intensity, it would learn to prioritize its efforts.
I love that. The paper even uses this metaphor of like inner thinking to explain how it works. It's almost as if the model is learning to introspect and figure out where it needs to put in the extra effort.
It's a really interesting way to think about it. And it's cool because the researchers actually looked at how standard transformers learn. And they noticed that when a model encounters a difficult word or phrase, it actually causes a spike in something called the gradient nuclear norm.
Whoa, okay, hold on. That sounds a bit intimidating. Can you break that down for us a little? Like, what does that even mean in simpler terms?
Sure. You can think of it like a pressure gauge for the model's learning. When the model stumbles upon something that it's having trouble understanding, that pressure spikes, right? And that's kind of a signal that the model needs to put more effort into grasping that specific piece of information.
So it's like the model is hitting a mental roadblock and it's saying like, hold up, I need to take a closer look at this.
Exactly. And what the researchers found was that these spikes are often a result of limitations in the model's architecture. It's like the model's very structure is preventing it from delving deeper into those trickier words or phrases.
Ah, that makes sense. Like trying to put together a puzzle, but you're missing a few key pieces. No matter how hard you try, you're going to hit a wall.
Precisely. And that's where the ITT comes in. It introduces a mechanism for the model to allocate more thinking steps to those difficult parts. You could think of it like the model is zooming in to get a clearer picture.
So instead of just trying to brute force its way through all the information, it's learning to be more selective about where it focuses its energy. That sounds pretty efficient.
It is, and that efficiency comes from these three key mechanisms that work together: adaptive token routing, residual thinking connections, and thinking step encoding.
Okay, let's dive into those. First up, adaptive token routing. What exactly is that?
All right, so imagine a model is reading through some text, right? And it comes across a really complex sentence, maybe one full of technical jargon. Well, adaptive token routing works like a filter. It identifies the specific words that need extra attention. It's like the model is saying, hey, these words are super important to understanding the sentence. I gotta spend more time on them.
So it's not just reading everything at the same speed, it's learning to pick out the parts that are actually important.
Exactly. And then comes the second mechanism, residual thinking connections. Once those important words are identified, they get routed through additional thinking steps. You can picture it like going over a problem multiple times to make sure you really understand it.
Interesting. So it's not just thinking more, but thinking smarter, like refining the understanding through these multiple passes.
Right, and each step actually builds upon the previous one, right? So it's constantly deepening the model's understanding, kind of like taking a closer and closer look at something until you can see all the intricate details.
And that's where the thinking step encoding comes in, right? To kind of keep track of all these different steps.
Exactly. That acts like a timestamp for each of these refinements. That way, the model can remember the order of its thoughts and build on what it's already learned, avoiding any confusion.
So to sum it up, adaptive token routing is like the filter. Residual thinking connections are the multiple passes. And thinking step encoding is the memory that keeps everything organized.
You got it. And all three of these work together to allow the model to adjust its thinking power based on how complex the information is.
Wow, this is some really fascinating stuff. This seems like a really elegant way to deal with the efficiency problems in LLMs, but how well does this actually work in practice? I'm really curious to hear about the results.
Well, they actually found that the ITT could perform just as well as the standard transformer models, sometimes even better, but using way fewer parameters.
That's amazing. So it's not just more efficient, it might actually be more powerful too.
Exactly, and the efficiency gains are pretty impressive. It actually needs fewer computations during inference, which means it can process information and respond quicker.
So faster processing, less resources, and potentially even better performance. This is sounding pretty revolutionary.
It is, and one of the things that really stood out to me was this idea of what they call elastic computation.
Elastic computation. What is that?
So basically, it means that the model can actually adjust its thinking power on the fly depending on the task and what resources are available. Almost like a brain that can switch between like really deep thought and quick processing when it needs to.
So it's adaptable, like a mental gymnast. It can handle the tough stuff, but also knows when to conserve energy for the easier tasks.
Exactly. And to give you an example, let's look at one of the tasks they tested, question answering. They found that for a simple question, the ITT would just grab the key info and give a short answer, using only a few thinking steps. But for tougher questions, those more nuanced, it would use more of those thinking steps to really analyze the tricky parts.
That's really cool. It's like the model knows when to really dive deep and when it can just skim the surface.
Right. And this approach, where it focuses on specific parts, not only makes it efficient, but also helps us understand how it's making decisions. We can actually see what parts of the input it focused on and why, which is really important.
That's really important for building trust in AI, especially as these systems get more complex and we start using them more and more in our lives.
Absolutely. And to make it even clearer, the researchers actually visualized how the ITT chose which tokens to focus on. And guess what? It tended to give more attention to verbs and other words that carry a lot of meaning, just like a human would.
So it's almost as if it's developing its own understanding of what's important in a sentence, similar to how we naturally pay attention to the action words and key ideas.
That's a great way to put it. Now, even though this research is really promising, the paper does point out some limitations. For example, right now, the ITT uses these preset routing patterns during training, so it can't fully adapt to every single new input it comes across.
So it's like having a study plan, but not being able to change it on the fly when you hit a really tough concept.
Yeah, good analogy. Another limitation is that they only tested it on models with a relatively small number of parameters compared to some of those massive LLMs out there. So we don't know yet how it would perform at a much larger scale.
So there's still room for exploration and improvement, which is exciting. It means we're only at the beginning of what we can do with this approach.
Absolutely. And the researchers have outlined a few directions for future work. One area they're interested in is improving the thinking step encoding to make it better at tracking and remembering information over time.
It's like giving the model an even better memory so it can hold on to and recall information more effectively.
Exactly. They're also looking into ways to make the residual thinking connections use less memory during training, which would be crucial for making the ITT work with those really big LLMs.
It sounds like they're setting the stage for AI to be both incredibly powerful and remarkably efficient. I'm really excited to see what comes next with this research.
Me too. It's really inspiring to see how researchers are constantly pushing the boundaries of what's possible with AI. But beyond the technical stuff, I think we need to think about the bigger implications of this work too.
Absolutely. It's not just about making AI more efficient, it's about opening up new ways we can interact with technology and use it to solve problems in the real world.
Exactly. Imagine AI assistants that really understand our needs and personalize their responses, or learning platforms that can adapt to each student's individual learning style.
Or even its impact on scientific discovery with AI models that can analyze huge amounts of data and help us make breakthroughs in areas like medicine or climate science.
The possibilities are endless, but we need to remember that responsible AI development is crucial as we make these advancements.
I completely agree. We have to make sure these powerful tools are used ethically and for the good of everyone.
And that's a conversation we need to keep having as AI keeps evolving. It's a responsibility we all share to make sure these technologies are developed and used in a way that reflects our values and benefits all of humanity.
Well said. This has been such an insightful deep dive into the inner thinking transformer. It's got me thinking about all the ways this could change the world.
It really speaks to the power of human ingenuity and the incredible potential of AI. And I think we're just at the beginning of a new wave of innovation.
Before we wrap things up, I have one last question for you. What's the one thing you hope our listeners will remember from our deep dive today?
Well, I hope they realize that AI doesn't have to be this mysterious black box, you know? The inner thinking transformer is a good example of how we can build systems that are not only powerful and efficient, but also transparent, so we can actually understand how they're making decisions. And that's really important if we want to trust these systems and make sure they're used for good.
That's a really great point. It's not just about the technology itself, but about how we approach it and how we use it. We need to make sure AI is developed ethically and with, a focus on what's best for humanity.
Exactly. And I think this research shows us we're moving in the right direction. We can create AI that's both smart and aligns with our values.
This has been a really incredible deep dive into the inner thinking transformer. I feel like I've learned so much, and honestly, I'm pretty excited about the future of AI now.
Me too. It's a field that's constantly changing, and this research really gives us a glimpse of what's possible.
I want to thank you again for joining us today and sharing your expertise. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
The pleasure was all mine. Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening, thank you for tuning into the deep dive. We hope you found this episode insightful and maybe even a little inspiring.
Keep those minds curious, and be sure to join us next time for another deep dive into the world of knowledge and discovery.
Until then, happy exploring.